Welcome to a series that we call The End of Times, where we're going through the book of Revelation verse by verse to try our best to see what it is we can expect to happen in the end times, as well as see what it is we're expected to be doing during the end times. And as we've gone through the book of Revelation, where we are is we've made it finally to chapter 13. And what has happened in the previous 13 chapters, the short of it, is that John had been taken up into the throne room of God, where we're given a chance to look around, and he notices that God has a scroll in his hand with 7 seals. And it's determined only Jesus Christ is worthy to open that scroll, and we've broken all 7 seals, and then what's written within that scroll is the divine coming of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. It's establishing his kingdom, which has been the plan since Genesis. And what we see that in is in the form of 7 trumpets, and many, very tragic events take place in those 7 trumpets. But when we get to the 7th trumpet, there's a pause in the story where we're introduced to some characters, and it's so critically important we understand what's taking place in chapter 12 before we get into 13. And we've been spending at least the last 5 episodes on chapter 12. But ultimately what you have is we're introduced to 3 characters: a woman, who is Israel, and a dragon, who is the devil. And the woman gives birth to a child who is Jesus Christ, who redeems mankind. And then the dragon, who is Satan, is then trying to devour that woman, which has been probably, since the beginning of Israel, it's been the case, to today. And also trying to devour the woman's offspring, so the Christians, the remnant of what has been born from Jesus Christ. And so we're just going to go back and read the very last verse of 12 before we get into 13. Now, I've prayed a lot about how I'm going to kind of talk about chapter 13, because chapter 13 we're introduced to 2 beasts. We're introduced to the beast of the sea and the beast of the land. And it gets fairly confusing, and there's so much to be said about those 2 beasts, and so many references in the Old Testament as well as in the New Testament to those 2 beasts. And as I thought about kind of how we're going to kind of attack that and see what it is going on with these 2 beasts, I'm just going to go verse by verse. So I'm not going to tell you who I think these beasts are or anything like that. We're just going to go verse by verse, and then when we get to the end of chapter 13, we have a good grip on what these 2 beasts are, how you can identify them, where they're from, what they represent, how you can identify them through math, through history, through scripture. We'll wait till we can put all those cards on the table and look at them in one picture. So we're just going to go through this verse by verse, but we're going to start off with the last verse in chapter 12. That's chapter 12, verse 17. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Now, that's an important moment in time and in history, because what has taken place is you had 144,000 Jews marked by God, and God made a place for them. So the moment that the Antichrist sat in the temple and declared himself to be God, there was this place for the Jews that are marked by God to be a remnant to war against the Antichrist. He had a place for them to go. And as we went through chapter 12, there was nothing that the dragon could do. The earth swallowed everything he threw at the 144,000 Jews. So what we see in 17, and this is so important, so I'm going to go back and read it. And the dragon was enraged with the woman. So of course he's mad about Israel because he can't touch them. And he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. So where does he turn his attention to? The Christians, who keep the commandment of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. All right, now let's start in 13, verse 1. Then I stood on the sand of the sea. Now I'm going to pause there for a second, because this is important. Okay, so where's John at? Because he has been in the throne room of God up until this point. But as we're going to see, he is still in the throne room of God. So before we talk about this beast that comes out of the sea, I want to just kind of refer you back to when John was looking around the throne room of God in verse 4, or in chapter 4, and it says, in verse 6. Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal. So before the throne of God there's the sea. So now John's standing on the shore of the sea and he sees a spiritual, now it's important we understand, the beast is a spiritual thing. So he's seeing what, almost like the symbol of what this spiritual beast is. All right, let's pick it up in verse 6. I just want to make sure you understand where John is. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. All right. That's a crazy looking beast. So ultimately, let's just kind of go back. So what you have is he's standing on the shore of the sea, and he sees a beast coming up out of the sea. All right, let's continue in 2. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and his great authority. So this beast is given authority by Satan to do the things that he is going to do, because Satan is the prince of the earth. So we read in 12, he was cast to the earth with a third of the angels. And now what we have is now he's short on time. So he tries to, as soon as he declares himself to be God, there's 144,000 Jews that are now warring against him. He can't do anything about it. He turns his attention to the Christians as well, because the Christians are essentially, now, I want to take a moment real quick, because again, it's almost like the Spirit is telling me to say this. Many, many, many professed Christians will be betrayed, and they will be confused, and they will worship the beast, period. Period. So don't think that because maybe, I think there's a lot of Christians who are going to think they're on the side of good. But the reality is they're not. And in the end, well, why not? Well, it's because, just like Jesus said, well, you didn't know me. A lot of people turn their attention towards political gain, or towards power, or towards their favorite politician, or they begin to worship a person rather than worshiping God. And it's so easily, people fall into that category pretty darn easy. So as we kind of get into who this beast is, I just want to make that very clear. So when he turns his attention towards the Christians, he's not turning his attention towards the Christians who are supporting him financially, supporting him with all their social media posts, supporting him. He's not turning his attention to them. He's turning his attention towards the remnant of Jesus Christ, who stand up and profess Jesus Christ in the face of adversity of the world. That's who he's turning his attention to. And we know that because we've seen this beast before. Daniel saw this beast. So we're going to kind of go back and we're going to spend a little bit of time in Daniel just to simply say, okay, what is this beast? Because Daniel not only sees the beast, but an angel explains to him what this is. And then we'll come back and we'll kind of then get back into 13 and talk about, well, what is the beast doing? That sort of thing. So we're going to go back to Daniel chapter 7. Now, we're going to read pretty much this whole chapter because we're going to skip the first 3 beasts. Daniel sees 4 beasts. He sees Persia, Greece, and Rome, and we're not going to get into that. Like, this isn't a study of this particular vision of Daniel. This is just a study of what it is Daniel saw in the 4th beast, the same beast that John has seen as well, because an angel then it goes on to explain. So we're going to skip the first 3, so we'll just pick it up in 7 and just follow along. So we're in Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and a vision of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Now, we talked, if you haven't seen the episode on the 4 winds of heaven, go back and watch that. All right, let's continue in 3. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion. We're going to skip to 5. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. Now we're going to skip to 6. And then I looked, and there was another like a leopard. All right, now we're going to skip to 7. After this I saw in the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. As we continue on through Revelation, we'll kind of come back, because Revelation also sees these 3 horns being plucked out, and it gets into that. So we're just going to keep reading. So just follow along. A lot of these things, the eyes, the horns, that'll all be explained here shortly, or at least definitely it'll all be crystal clear by the time we finish with 13. So just hang in there. It's a little murky right now, but Daniel is seeing the same beast here. Pick it up at 9. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. So what Daniel is seeing here is he's seeing this fourth beast, and it's awful, but what the result of this beast's rise to power was the throne of God is now having dominion on the earth. So even though he sees this beast, the result is God's kingdom established on earth as it is in heaven. But this is not a pretty path towards this. So we're going to continue in 10. So he's seeing this kingdom of God. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. So we're going to come back to who those people are here shortly, because it's very important we understand, well, who is that's worshiping him? Pick it up in 11. I watched, then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking, I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed, and given to the burning flame. So we're seeing the destruction of this beast by Jesus. Verse 12. As for the rest of the beast, they had their dominion taken away. So again, that was already in the past. Their dominion was taken away. Yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So even though these because you had Persia, which is still around. You have Greece, which is still around. You had Rome, which, it's not around, but it's around, it's around. If you look at the European Empire, it's essentially, it's not called Rome, but it's around. Yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. So we're seeing the coming of this kingdom of God. So we see the first or the fourth beast, and then as it is destroyed and thrown into the fire, we now have the kingdom of God. So this is a very important beast because it brings about the kingdom of heaven. All right, we'll continue in 15. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit with my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts which are four kings, which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So what he's saying is those beasts, they're kings and kingdoms that will rise out of the earth, but it is the saints of the Most High that will ultimately reign forever and ever and ever. That's you and me, by the way. All right, let's continue in 19. Then I wish to know the truth about the fourth beast. I love that he found that one peculiar. They're all pretty darn peculiar with that one. Why? Which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron, its nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue of its feet. And about the 10 horns that there were on its head, and about the other horn which had came out before the 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. This is a really important piece, because I don't understand. When people study Revelation, they don't see themselves in a war. They think that they're raptured up. They don't, that this won't have anything to do with me. No, there's a war against the saints. We've seen it so many times in Revelation, and we're going to come back to that, because what does the dragon do? Let's go back to that. Well, the dragon attacked the woman, did not prevail, tried to attack the child, did not prevail, so he finally turns his attention towards the saints. And as we're going to see in 13, the dragon gave him authority to war against the saints. All right, we'll pick it back up in 22. Or we'll read 21 again. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came. And a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it into pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings, who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So, ultimately what they're talking about here is this beast will rise up, and again, we'll get into who are these 10 kings, who are the 3 that were uprooted, who is the one that overthrew them, who is the one that they're worshiping in the first place. Again, we're going to come back. We got to just look at all pieces, but I think it's so critical to see the significance of what Daniel saw. Daniel saw this beast rising out of the earth. Now, it was peculiar because it represented the entire planet. It came up out of the sea. And as we've talked about in the past, anytime something pops up out of the sea, it's popping out of the multitude of nations and tongues and tribes. So this beast is coming from the whole world. Whereas in the second beast comes from the land. So now that we kind of know all this, the importance of what Daniel saw was he saw the coming of the kingdom, God's kingdom on earth, as he saw in heaven. The beast that he saw was so peculiar because he was warring against the saints, and that actually ultimately brought about Jesus Christ's return to war against the Antichrist. It's really kind of a beautiful story, but it's so important that, again, we can't just see ourselves being raptured up. He's warring against the saints. The war is against the saints. As we go back and we look at, chapter 6 and 7, we see a multitude of saints slain from all tribes, nations, and tongues. So what we see here is we ultimately have a dragon, Satan, who's given authority to some rulers to take one of them, ultimately declare themselves to be God, and then a lot of people, I just can't say this enough, is that, a lot of Christians are going to be fooled. A lot are going to be fooled, if not most. It is only a few. Well, it'll be a multitude, but compared to, when you have half the population of the planet probably declaring themselves to be, some sort of pseudo-Christian base or whatever it may be, at least a third, not nearly that much is actually going to be declared Christian by God. When God sits on his throne as Jesus Christ and declares, then just establish his kingdom on earth, those who sit in front of him, like we saw in Daniel, those who sit with him and reign with him, that's the remnant of Jesus Christ, those who stand and profess Jesus. The Antichrist doesn't have any interest in warring against those who are funding his political gain. He's not interested in warring against those who are just following along with his. I mean, essentially, they're pigs being led off to slaughter, and the Antichrist and the dragon is essentially laying down a trail of food to the slaughterhouse, and many Christians, that's the way they're going to go because it's comfortable, it's filled with self-gain, and in the end it leads to destruction. But there will be a few that the rest of the world is against, and it'll feel like they're being destroyed because many of them will be slain. And as we read, he will prevail against them, but not just like we saw in Daniel. And just like we saw in Revelation, it'll be 3.5 years of this war between the saints and the world. And it's not going to be pretty for really anybody. And as we read in verse 11, it's once they're killed that the world celebrates, like they kind of make a holiday out of the whole thing. So, all right, let's continue in 13. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, so he's standing in the throne room, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. So what we saw from Daniel was that these are kings, and these are leaders and kingdoms, and there's 10 of them. So we're going to, that's where we're going to hit next time, is we're going to start talking about what these horns are. But this episode, it's so critical that we see that what we're witnessing here is what Daniel saw was the coming of this beast, and then he saw the coming of Jesus Christ, took the beast, slayed him, threw him into the fire, and then he reigned on earth with the saints. That's what's taking place here, and that's why this is so important, and that's why we see, verse 12:17 leads into it. The dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring. That's the saints. Keep the commandment of God and have a testimony of Jesus Christ. So it's clearly Christians, the remnant of Christians, standing up for Jesus, not for the world. A lot of Christians will stand up for the world. And then now we see, well, what is this beast? What is this thing that's warring against the saints that they're going to have to deal with for 3.5 years before the coming of Jesus Christ? So love to hear your thoughts on all this. Hopefully I didn't make it more confusing than it is. So we're just going to take Revelation 13. We're just going to go verse by verse. We just did verse 1. We kind of touched on verse 2, but we're going to break down verse 1 and 2 and talk about what do these horns represent, what do the crowns represent, what do the heads represent, what are the leopard's feet and all that. What does all that represent next time? So love to hear your thoughts on this, though. Put it in the comments below. If you like this video, click like and subscribe. If you feel called to support our channel to Patreon, that link is also below. But the most important part of this channel is we take prayer requests, so never hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, and love guns.